Welcome back to the channel. You may have noticed that money rarely disappears because of one big purchase, but slowly through small, everyday habits we don't really pay attention to. I lived like that for a long time, not overspending, not buying luxury things. Yet somehow my money never seemed to stay. What made it exhausting was constantly trying to be more disciplined, more careful, while still feeling like I was doing something wrong. For a long time, I thought the problem was a lack of willpower, until I realized it was the way I was spending money in automatic everyday moments that caused it to slip away. In this video, I'm sharing 10 practical changes that helped me keep more money for myself without living miserably or cutting out everything I enjoy. And the first one is a small habit many people see as harmless, but it plays a much bigger role in where your money goes than you might think. The first real shift happened when I noticed something uncomfortable. My cabinets were full, but I still felt like I didn't have enough. There was always a backup, an extra bottle, another version of the same thing. Things I bought just in case, even though the old ones were still half used. At some point, I stopped trying to buy less and did something much simpler. I stopped buying anything new until I had actually finished what I already owned. Not use less, not save it for later. Finished. A very small example, I had 3 body lotions open at the same time. None of them were empty, so every time I saw a new one on sale, it felt reasonable to buy it. Once I decided to finish one completely before opening or buying another, something changed. The urge to buy disappeared, not because I was forcing myself, but because there was no longer any space for it mentally or physically. That's when it clicked for me. The problem wasn't that I didn't have enough things. The problem was that nothing ever felt done. When things aren't finished, every new purchase quietly becomes another responsibility, something to store, remember, manage, and eventually feel guilty about. And that invisible weight adds up faster than the price tag. Once I started finishing what I had, buying stopped feeling urgent. And when buying stops feeling urgent, money finally gets a chance to stay. What surprised me most was that my space started to feel lighter even before I decluttered anything. And that's when I realized something important: clutter isn't always about having too many things. Very often it's driven by something much deeper, something emotional that quietly shapes how we buy, keep, and hold on to things. I'm going to unpack that in more detail in the next video, because once you see what's really underneath the clutter, a lot of your habits suddenly make sense. It's one of those insights that changes how you look at both money and your space. But before we got there, the next shift I made had nothing to do with shopping at all, and everything to do with how money leaks away in small, everyday moments we barely notice. The next thing I had to admit was uncomfortable. I truly believed I was a careful spender. I didn't buy luxury items, I didn't shop constantly, and yet money still felt tight. What I didn't see at first was how much I was wasting quietly in ways that never showed up as bad spending. It showed up in small, everyday moments. Food that went bad in the back of the fridge because I forgot it was there. Skincare products I opened with good intentions, then stopped using halfway through. Things I paid for once and then paid again simply because I couldn't remember what I already had. The problem wasn't that I was careless. It was that waste is silent. It doesn't feel dramatic when a yogurt expires or a cream dries out. But over time, it adds up not just in money, but in mental weight. Every wasted item carried a quiet sense of guilt, another reminder that I wasn't on top of things the way I wanted to be. The shift wasn't about becoming stricter. It was about becoming more honest. Before buying anything, I started asking one simple question: will I actually finish this? Not will I use it sometimes. Not is it a good deal, but finish. For example, instead of buying fresh produce for an ideal week, I bought for the next 3 days. Instead of opening a new product because it felt exciting, I committed to finishing the one already open. Slowly, waste went down, and so did unnecessary spending. What surprised me was how much lighter everything felt. Less guilt, less money slipping away unnoticed, less pressure to do better. And that's when I realized something important. Even when we stop wasting things, money can still disappear, especially when we're tired, busy, and not fully present. That's where the next shift came in. The next realization hit even closer to home. I wasn't bad with money. I was just tired. On days when I felt drained, money became a shortcut. Too tired to cook meant ordering food. Too overwhelmed to think meant scrolling and buying something small online. None of it felt like overspending. It felt like surviving the day. The problem was that I was using money as a form of relief. And relief doesn't last. Ordering food didn't fix my exhaustion. Buying something new didn't give me more energy. It only delayed the moment when I actually had to rest. And afterward, there was always that quiet feeling of regret, not because of the money itself, but because I knew it didn't solve what I needed. The shift here wasn't about cutting myself off. It was about noticing when I was spending. I started doing one simple thing before spending money. I paused and asked, am I tired, stressed, or actually needing this? If the answer was, I'm exhausted, I didn't make a rule. I made a different choice. Instead of ordering food immediately, I kept a few very easy meals at home, things that required almost no effort. Instead of buying something online to calm my nerves, I put the phone down and stepped away for 10 minutes. Not forever, just long enough to breathe. What changed wasn't my budget. It was my relationship with myself. Because if you've been here too, spending money in moments of fatigue, you're not lazy and you're not careless. You're just tired. And tired people don't need more discipline. They need fewer decisions. And once I stopped spending money to cope with exhaustion, something else became clear. Even when we're rested, money can still leak away quietly through habits we don't even notice yet. That's where the next shift came in. Next, I realized something that surprised me. It wasn't the big expenses that made me anxious about money. It was the small ones I couldn't track. I never remembered how much I had spent on coffee delivery fees, random snacks, or app subscriptions. None of those things felt serious on their own. A coffee here, a delivery there, a few euros for an app I barely noticed. But together they created a constant feeling of unease, like money was leaking out of my life without my permission. What made it worse was the mental noise. I wasn't stressed because I spent money. I was stressed because I didn't know what I was doing. The change wasn't about banning anything. I didn't stop buying coffee. I didn't delete every app. I didn't tell myself never again. I simply decided to make these small expenses visible. For 1 month, I grouped them. Coffee went into one category, delivery into another, subscriptions into one list. I didn't judge the numbers, I just looked at them. And that alone changed everything. Once I could see where the money was going, the pressure eased. I naturally started making small adjustments without forcing myself. One less delivery. One subscription was canceled. Not because I had to, but because I finally understood my own habits. That's when I learned something important. Clarity is calming. When money feels clear, your mind feels lighter. You stop second-guessing yourself and start making choices instead of reacting. And with that clarity came the next shift. Because even when spending feels controlled, buying decisions themselves can still pull us in without us noticing. That's where the next change began. The next shift didn't come from budgeting or cutting back. It came from realizing how temporary most shopping urges actually are. I used to think that when I really wanted something, it meant I should buy it before the feeling passed. But once I started paying attention, I noticed a pattern. Many of the things I felt excited about at night felt completely unnecessary the next morning. So I changed one small habit. Instead of buying right away, I left items in my cart for 24 to 48 hours. No rules, no pressure, just time. What surprised me was how often the urge disappeared on its own. The item didn't change. My situation didn't change. But the emotional pull was gone. What had felt like a must-have suddenly felt neutral, or even irrelevant. A simple example, I'd add a sweater or a home item to my cart because it looked comforting after a long day. The next day, with a clearer head, I could see that I didn't actually need it. I didn't have to convince myself. The decision was made itself. That's when I understood something important. Most impulsive spending isn't about the item. It's about the moment. And once you give yourself time, you don't need iron discipline or strict rules. You don't need to fight yourself. You just need space for the feeling to pass. Letting time do the work made buying calmer, slower, and more intentional. And when buying slowed down, something else became obvious: sales discounts, and good deals suddenly had a lot less power over me. That's where the next shift came in. This was a hard one to admit. A big part of my spending wasn't driven by need but by discounts. When something was on sale, buying it felt responsible. Smart even. I told myself I was saving money, so it didn't really count as spending. But when I looked around, the pattern was clear. I had drawers full of discounted items I wasn't actually using. Clothes bought because they were half off, not because they fit my life. Household items bought for later, still sitting unopened. The price was low, but the mental cost was high. That's when I realized something important: sales aren't the problem. Buying without intention is. The shift wasn't about avoiding discounts altogether. It was about changing the question I asked myself. Instead of, "Is this a good deal?" I started asking, "Would I buy this at full price?" If the answer was no, I didn't buy it no matter how good the discount looked. And if the answer was yes, I made sure it was something essential: groceries. I already used personal care items I finished regularly, or basics I knew I'd need anyway. For example, I stopped buying clothes on sale just because they were cheap. But I did stock up on everyday items I already finished consistently. Same action, completely different outcome. What changed was how I felt afterward. Less clutter, less regret, less money tied up in things that looked good on a receipt but didn't actually support my life. Once I stopped chasing deals, buying became calmer. And that calm made space for the next realization. Because even when spending is intentional, comparison can still quietly push us to buy things we don't truly need. That's where the next shift began. This shift was quieter, but it explained a lot. I wasn't just spending money because I wanted things. I was spending because I felt behind. I noticed it in small comparisons. Other people's homes looked calmer. Their routines seemed more put together. Their lives appeared more together than mine. And without realizing it, I was using money to catch up. A better version of something, a small upgrade. Another purchase meant to make my life look or feel more complete. The breaking point was realizing this: I wasn't buying for my actual life. I was buying to measure up. What changed wasn't my income or my budget. It was the standard I was using. I started asking one grounding question before buying: is this for my life or for an image? If it was about keeping up, proving something, or quiet reassurance that I was doing fine, I paused. A simple example: instead of upgrading home items because I saw better versions online, I focused on what already worked. Instead of buying clothes to look more put together, I paid attention to what I actually wore and felt comfortable in. Slowly, the urge to match someone else's life faded. What came with that was relief. I didn't need to prove I was doing well. I didn't need my spending to explain to me. I could let my life be quieter and still enough. And once I stopped chasing someone else's standard, another truth became clear: a lot of things I thought I needed didn't actually need to belong to me at all. That's where the next shift began. This realization came quietly after I noticed how tired my space was making me feel. I wasn't surrounded by useless things, but I was surrounded by things I barely used. Items bought with good intentions. Tools, appliances, clothes, pieces of furniture that came out once or twice a year. They weren't cheap, and they weren't mistakes. But owning them meant storing them, organizing them, cleaning around them, and thinking about them. That's when it clicked: ownership wasn't solving the problem. It was creating more of it. The shift here was gentle. Before buying something new, I started asking, how often will I actually use this? If the answer was rarely, I looked for another option. Sometimes that meant borrowing, sometimes renting, sometimes sharing. A tool from a neighbor. A special item used once for an event. Something I could return once the moment passed. What changed immediately was the weight of my space. Less stuff meant fewer decisions, fewer things to remember, fewer items asking for my attention every time I walked past them. And what surprised me most was how freeing it felt not deprived. I still got what I needed. I just didn't have to carry it with me afterward. That's when I understood something important. The less you own, the less your mind has to manage. And once your mind feels lighter, it becomes much easier to see where your time, energy, and money should actually go. And with that clarity, the next shift became unavoidable, because the way we rest plays a much bigger role in our spending than we often realize. This shift didn't start with money. It started with how I treated myself after a long day. Whenever I felt drained, stressed, or emotionally flat, my default reward was buying something. Not expensive things, just small purchases that felt comforting in the moment. The problem was that shopping became a shortcut for rest, and shortcuts don't actually restore you. Buying something new gave me a brief sense of relief, but it never made me feel better for long. What stayed was clutter, less money, and the quiet pressure of owning more than I needed. The reward faded quickly, but the weight remained. The change came when I stopped asking, what can I buy to feel better, and started asking, what would actually help me recover? Sometimes the answer was rest. Sometimes it was doing nothing. Sometimes it was clearing a surface, closing a tab, or leaving space in my day instead of filling it. I began to reward myself with time, quiet, and emptiness, things that didn't cost anything but gave me back a lot. A simple example, instead of ordering something online at night as a treat, I closed my laptop and went to bed earlier. Instead of buying a small item to lift my mood, I cleared my desk so the next morning felt lighter. The reward wasn't something new, it was the absence of pressure. What changed wasn't my lifestyle becoming smaller. It became calmer. I felt lighter not because I had more, but because I carried less stuff, less guilt, less emotional spending. And once I stopped using shopping as a reward, the final shift became clear, because rest itself doesn't have to be expensive to be real. That's where the last change came in. This was the final shift, and in many ways the most important one. For a long time, rest and spending were tied together in my mind. Time off meant going somewhere, buying something, planning something. And without realizing it, rest itself had become another source of pressure. What changed was my definition of rest. I stopped treating it like an event and started treating it like space. Instead of planning trips or activities every time I had time off, I began staying close to home. No packed schedules. No long lists, just slower days with fewer decisions. A walk without a destination. A quiet morning without trying to make the most of it. A day where nothing needed to be productive or impressive. This kind of rest didn't cost money, but it gave me something I hadn't had in a long time: recovery. And something unexpected happened. When I rested properly, I spent less without trying. I didn't reach for convenience as often. I didn't buy things to cope with stress. I didn't need little rewards to get through the day. A simple example: when I stopped filling my days off with plans, I stopped ordering food out of exhaustion. When I allowed myself real downtime, online shopping lost its appeal. Not because I was restricting myself, but because I didn't need it anymore. That's when everything came together. Rest wasn't separate from my finances. It was part of them. When you rest in a way that actually restores you, spending slows down naturally. And that's how, without strict rules or constant self-control, money finally starts to stay. At the end of the day, this video wasn't about becoming stricter with money. It was about noticing the small, everyday habits that quietly decide whether money stays or slips away, and choosing a calmer way to live with them. And what I didn't fully understand at first is that once spending slows down, another question naturally shows up: why clutter and the urge to buy feels so emotionally charged in the first place. That's what I'm talking about in the next video. Not more tips, not more rules, but the deeper reasons so many of us hold on, buy more, or feel uneasy letting things go. It's one of those topics that changes how you see clutter spending and even yourself, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. And if this kind of content feels useful, you can leave a like so I know what's actually helping you, and I'll see you in the next one.